Hi, John.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Glad you could make it.
What?
Glad you could make it.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you could make it too. I wonder if anyone else is going to have time. I I love the framing of this cafe, but as I already expressed, the timing really sucks. Um, I had other plans, but because of Greta's eloquent plea for elders to pay attention, I'm showing up, even though it's very inconvenient for me. And I'm just sharing that with you up front so that I don't sound pissed off.
Hmm.
Okay. Because I would like my vagus nerve to be stimulated so that my voice and my face and my eyes communicate to anyone who's involved that I'm safe. I'm a safe person. Okay. Not aiming to be sane, but I am definitely a safe person. So where would you like to start? It looks like no one else has shown up. If someone does, that would be great. But if no one else does, I hope we can have an interesting exchange. So how about you, Mark?
Let's give it a try. I did not see that there was a topic planned for today's cafe, and as it has been a regular occurrence, weekly almost, for over 2 years now, it seemed, on the one hand, um, maybe or maybe not important, and maybe or maybe not essential, but uh, possibly beneficial to show up and to do something and to um, keep the streak going, to keep it alive. Uh, and second, the speeches that I saw and a couple of pretty peripheral, what were peripheral discussions that I've had in the last few days with coworkers, uh, brought my attention to the issues, to the issue that Greta is pointing to, in a way that, while at any other time I could have heard it and cognitively grasped it, at this particular time, uh, because of a whole constellation of um, realities, let's say, conversations I've had, thoughts I've had, work that I'm doing, and the whole field. It just got my attention in a new way and it crystallized. And so I put it into words and I said, I want this cafe to happen. And that's why we're here. And I watched the clips, uh, but there's nothing to see. I mean, there's in a sense nothing to see because everything she's saying is stuff we already know. What is unique and riveting, I think, about this particular moment and the particular communications that she's making and that are being amplified through the media is that they're so simple and direct. You have to be an idiot not to receive the meaning that's being conveyed. And I don't want to be an idiot. I want to be responsible, response able with the hyphen in the middle as well to what is being pointed to. And it brings up, all kinds of questions and issues, but the point is not the questions and issues. I mean, the point is the action that is um, required. But uh, this is a cafe. In a cafe, we speak, we talk. And so um, perhaps the first question I might ask is, well, what are we doing here? And can this conversation that you and I, John, uh, are having, uh, can this be part of a solution? Or is it more chatter that's distracting from the crisis or the emergency uh, being pointed to? If this were a crowded theater and there was really a fire and somebody was yelling fire, we would be pretty idiotic to sit there sipping on our chais or cafes. And so it's like a reality check, perhaps. That's maybe how I'd like to treat it. And I'll work on my vagus nerve as well. It might have a little bit of a little flutter of morbidity or of catastrophe anxiety as part of it, and that's perhaps part of our zeitgeist as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I so much agree, and I'm drawing upon many conversations that we have had on the cafe and in other spaces. So I'm hoping to frame some of my remarks, chunking down and chunking slow as best as I can. I think you titled this Who Wants, what was the title of this?
Who Wants to Save the World?
Who Wants to Save the World? If I had time to think about this, which I don't, I would edit it to what wants to change the world. Because whatever that is that wants to change this world is way beyond our identity. We have to go to another level, as I believe Greta is demonstrating. And I'm going to quote, and I know you forbade poetics, but I'm sorry. I can't do that as much as I'd like to comply with your request.
It wasn't a request, though. I pointed out that we often engage, we being a general amorphous, we adults over the age of 18, let's say, engage in various kinds of language games. Poetics being one of them, politics being another, commerce being yet another. And what I see in Greta is that she's not playing a language game in a way. And so that perhaps is the what that you are pointing to.
Well, she's very direct. And as you say, she's not saying anything we don't already know. But it's being amplified by the media in a way it never has been before. You mentioned, I'm putting a few differences in our language game. You talked about an idiot. You don't want to be an idiot. Who does want to be an idiot? I remember quoting Shakespeare, "Life is told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." I think this is an ultimate statement of coming from nihilism. I don't think we want to be idiots, but we are almost all of us embedded in a deep nihilism, which I think is what Greta is very good at, blowing the whistle and identifying that. So what is the relationship between idiot and nihilist? I think you as a former Heideggerian may have much to offer here. But maybe it would be good for me to sort of line up a few hopefully useful questions to sort of set that up. It may not be this cafe, it may be another cafe, and it may be something beyond the cafe. I almost feel like the cafes are not serious enough in the 2 hours we get together, half an hour of which is usually spent in talking about the weather, unless we have a decided frame, which I found tends to, from an audience perspective, galvanize attention in ways that talking about the weather does not. Although maybe on this particular occasion, talking about the weather might be nice, because basically that's what she's talking about is the weather. And what's the difference between weather and climate? That's a big leap. Most of us can't make that because it's so abstract. But we can all talk about, oh, it's a beautiful breezy day, very mild here in Manhattan. But I'm going to go into Walt Whitman, a poem that you and I both love. I think it's, what is it called? Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. And he's an ambiguous speaker, speaking to the past and the future. And he's addressing himself very directly And it's this stanza 7. Closer yet, I approach you. What thought you have of me now? I had as much of you. I laid in my stores in advance. I considered long and seriously of you before you were born. Who was to know what should come home to me? Who knows? But I am enjoying this. Who knows, for all the distance? But I am as good as looking at you now, for all you cannot see me. I think it brings our attention to the nature of the ancestors and how they're invisible to us. And yet, strangely enough, we can sense them, especially in those nights where you wake up in the middle of the night, a very perplexing dream. And it may be such a perplexing dream that you may stay up for hours contemplating it. I'm wondering, where the hell did that come from? And I'm feeling my although I'm old enough to be Greta's grandfather, I consider her my sister. And I dreamed of her before she was born. As many, including Walt Whitman, dreamed of me before I was born. So I think that my dream was a very perplexing one, and I'm going to share my perplexity and my ambiguity rather than any kind of clarity with you. Because I think there is a relationship between Greta's outburst, begin, and her scolding her elders for their hardcore nihilism. And I believe what happens in those liminal zones. I am with a man. This happened last night, by the way. So I believe this, we've talked about social dreaming, and we've even had some sessions around social dreaming. So I don't claim this is my dream or necessarily about some psychological conditions that I'm dealing with, although there is something of that happening. But I'm with a man who is my brother, but I don't recognize him as one of my biological brothers. He's a kind of composite figure. And we are moving in a landscape and it's sort of dim, and we are in an invisible vehicle. There's a sense of being moved around in a car, but there's nothing visible. There's just the sensation of moving. We are talking about meditation and other esoteric ideas. I say, I have OBEs, out-of-body experiences. I have them 2 or 3 times a week. And I notice that a mandala shape on a piece of paper is before me, and there is a hole in the center, surrounded by a delicate filigree pattern. He points to the hole in the middle of this figure and says, empty. Then there is another exact mandala shape appear, and he points to the center of this new figure, this new mandala shape, which also has a hole in it. And he points to that hole, and he says, whole or whole, which I register as a lexical ambiguity. It could be H-O-L-E, or it could be W-H-O-L-E. Then he joins the 2 figures and the holes and W-H-O-L-E line up, and they're all empty, and they're entangled. And I collaborate with this stranger who is also my brother. So, this is what it looks like. Can you see the filigree? The delicate little, I don't know if you can see it in it.
That, I see it. Is that a paper towel or?
Yes, it is. Well, actually, it is a paper towel, and it's also from it's a dream symbol at the same time. Okay, mm-hmm. You see the hole?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's that one, and then there's this one. Now, my brother stranger in the dream pointed to this hole. He says, empty. And this other one, he points to this and he says, hole. I don't know if it means H-O-L-E or W-H-O-L-E. So we have a lexical ambiguity. The word can mean, sounds the same, but they mean something different. And then he did this. Okay? And it was nonverbal. They didn't say anything after that. So it's this, this, this. So I'm interested in, and this is way beyond the scope of this cafe or this potential conversation, but I have some questions, some meta questions. And I stayed up an hour or so contemplating this dilemma that I think this communication has offered to me, and now to you and to whoever else pays attention to this. And I think that what comes to me is the law of identity. A equals A is being challenged in this very concrete, I believe, demonstration. And I believe, is it whole, H-O-W-H-O-L-E, whole, W-H-O-L-E, both, and, neither, nor, and empty. All of those possibilities, none of those possibilities. This, I believe, is moving us more towards some kind of deviant logic, which is very different from the logic, I believe, that most of us are brought up on, and which I think drives nihilism. I think we need to start including the excluded middle. And if we did, we would have a very different relationship to one another, to economy, to art, to music, to drama, to ecology. I'm offering this as a demonstration of the birth of the symbol. And I'm just going to do a little history here, which, believe me, I'm not an expert in. But the symbol arises probably in the Greeks were doing it. It would be like two persons have a contract, they have an agreement, and they break a shard, and the two pieces of that shard that's been broken fit together. Sort of like this. And then we have what we call a token. So one member of this dyad goes off with one piece of the shard, and the other one goes off with the other. But suppose that one of the members in another country makes an alliance with someone and says, I want you to go back to my partner that I made this agreement with and update that agreement. And this shard, he has the other match. And this is what will confirm that you are not just a stranger who may be nefarious, but you are another partner. So when he goes back into that other territory where the original agreement was made with this other person, they can match the token. So this is the birth of the symbol. Okay. I think this is an echo. This is an echo object. I would say it's a boundary object between dimensions. And it's not obvious what it means. And from my perspective, very partial, we have to get very, very good at dealing with these kinds of ambiguities very quickly. Davor says we have about 10 years, or it's kaput, down the toilet. I don't know, maybe he's being alarmist. But now that I've heard the New York Times report, 2 days ago on the front page, the 2.9 billion birds had vanished from North America, on top of a whole lot of really bad news. I think it would, you have to really, really devote yourself to the current nihilism in order to deny all this, all these messages that are coming at us. So my larger question, I suppose, for you, is I've been riffing on my own liminal space and sharing my own liminal space. My attempt to integrate the third eye with the third ear. I'm acting it out right now in front of you and whatever audience comes to share this with us. I've taken something from my internal, the interior space, and I've externalized it. See this? This is external, and it's shared, okay? And I'm using language, I'm using the interior visual system, and the interior auditory digital system, and I'm bringing it into the external, the shared, the intersubjective, which is very, very, very mysterious. So I'm not claiming that I'm going to bring much clarity to this, but I think it's helpful if we get clear about how unclear all of this is. So that could be a blessing. And especially as we're dealing with 2.9 billion birds that have vanished, and I consider like St. Francis says, he celebrates brother sun and sister moon. Those birds are my brothers and sisters also. And I take it extremely personally that they're vanishing in such large numbers so quickly. At any rate, once again, I think I have some allies out there, certainly in Greta. And it makes me very hopeful that she has a platform and that people are listening to her. A bit of serendipity there, who would have thought? Wisdom from the mouth of babes. So anyway, I also, as you are, I think, a student of Heidegger, who I think is one of the most advanced nihilists among all the philosophers. You may disagree with me, but I think he demonstrates in his life and in his philosophy, I'm drawing on ecologist philosopher Tim Morton here, that we can't evade nihilism. If we try to fight nihilism, it gets stronger. We have to go through nihilism. And what's underneath nihilism? I believe, what's underneath nihilism, Marco? Okay, it's not that far away, what's underneath it and beyond it. But we have a very long history of reducing everything to, and whatever we reduce, there's something below that we've reduced, that below that it gets, and whatever we reduce it to gets more fundamental. So now we're living in a paradoxical world in which a quark is more real than an elephant. And I think we're getting plenty of feedback about that widely shared cultural belief. So anyway, thank you for giving me the space to explore this. I hope it's of use to you and to others. And I'm really, really eager to hear about other people's journeys to the other side of the moon. Thanks.
Okay. Let me share a dream that I had. It was many years ago, however, but I remember it partly because I haven't, in this life, had that many lucid dreams. So the ones I've had have been memorable, extra memorable. And this one was with my brother as well, and except my biological brother. And I think it took place over a decade ago, and I think that I was in our house. I was in my bed in this house in Colorado, in Longmont. And it was in the years after 9/11, the first decade after 9/11. So that's the context for why this would have been on my mind, uh, and how the particular symbol of the dream was formed. So we were in an amusement park, big festival, and people on rides and drinking Slurpees and eating hot dogs and things like that. And there was a commotion and a kind of vapor or smoke that went into the air, something that I could smell, something acrid, and a panic. Uh, and I came to understand intuitively that, and because of the scene and sirens going off and the whole theatrics of it, let's say, that it was a terrorist attack. And when I knew what had happened, and when people started dying all around, and I knew that I was going to die, and my brother was going to die, I turned to him and I told him I loved him. And then I sat down in a meditation with this thing, the cosmic mudra. And then I woke up. I thought that was a good sign. I thought that meant that my practice was working, because I had been practicing meditation since I was reading Heidegger. Since I started reading Heidegger, they came together. I think I needed one to offset the other. So, Idiocracy. I think Ken Wilber recommended that movie in one of our meetings, and I watched it, and it was very funny, and it's and it seemed plausible, but still pretty absurd compared to our lived reality. But I would argue and venture that it was prophetic, and that we humans, at the tail end of um, you know, well, uh, and the figure of the idiot can also be an angel in disguise, maybe. Uh, when I think about the dreams that I had, and when I think about the purpose of life that I may have had, like Greta talks about, the dreams that she had, the desires or aspirations that she had for her life. But when I think back to my own, they weren't that great, actually. I think they're better now. And part of the gift of idiocracy, and if I could frame it in those terms, is that it ultimately disappoints, and it becomes less funny. And that feeling that you've wasted your time with stupid things, pointless pursuits. I think it comes back to haunt one, and that, like, much like waking up after a party, hungover, after having maybe a really good time, but maybe not really remembering very much of it. And even what is remembered is, upon reflection, not that interesting. I think that that's a kind of reality that individually I know from such experiences, but I think socially, culturally, we're waking up to. We've had a good time, and not everyone, of course, and not in equal proportion. But I think the nihilism, in a way, is the hangover from an excess of exuberance, which historically, for us, is not an innocent pleasure, because the world that has been created through that exuberance has been at the cost of genocide, ecocide, and not only at the material level, but like also at the spiritual level. We've become, the general amorphous we, have become zombified to the effects, of our own actions. I wrote a book of poetry once, an ebook, technically. It's called The Joy of Nihilism, which I thought was a clever title. But I was trying to make a point as well, that in a way, we again, like, we have to embrace the ambiguity in that homophone that you shared, the whole and the whole.
Homophone?
Homophone.
I'll have to look that one up.
like a homophone, words that sound the same, spelled differently. Or it might be a homonym. But what I was reminded of donuts. The donut has a history in the Cosmos Café.
It sure does. I didn't even think of that. Pretty obvious now that you mention
it. The torus topology. There's a whole thread on that. The idiot has a history on the Cosmos Café.
And the angel as well.
The angel of silence.
The angel. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you? Go ahead.
No. Well, I wanted to think a little bit about the ship of death and about what's mythological in all this.
The ship of death. That comes from a quote from a poem by D.H. Lawrence. Have you built your ship of death? Or have you? Or build your ship of death, for you will need it.
Mm-hmm. And identity, I think, is part of this too. And then the shards that fit together, and the tokens, which, to me, I started taking notes, brought to mind cryptography, because what you described essentially was the birth of public key, what's technically now called public key cryptography.
What's it called?
Public key cryptography,
Oh, you're
where
updating me on all this. Thank you.
right. Google it or don't Google it.
I will. I will.
But it is that fitting together of unique shapes, which form a semantic whole when properly combined, that allows for the establishment or the signaling, let's say, of a trust relationship between parties involved. And um, so signaling and that way that messages get amplified, and that they get amplified along lines of identity, I think is a part of what is in play in this discourse. I don't want to call it a language game, like what Greta is doing, but it is. Like, it's a performance, but she's not and partly I think because of her youth, she's not an actor in the same sense in which you and I are actors.
Or Martin Luther King. I had a dream. That's acting on a very high level. And also that's a capacity for poetry on a very high level. He was a master of metaphor. And he moved people in ways that are, astonishing. But I think we should not put it on the actor. Martin Luther King was prepared for. Lots of people dreamed. Lots of many dreams overlapped to create the conditions for Martin Luther King, or for Greta, or for you and I in this conversation, which is being held. I'm in New York and you're in Colorado. So I think we could study the discourse, these discourse events, and search for patterns as we're doing right now. And in these liminal zones especially, I believe if we can tune into them, as I hear the train coming, and
I mute.
I think there's I believe there could be, elevating our discourse has been a topic I think we've discussed quite a bit. And I think brought many of us together because it is an emergency. I've never seen our public discourse descend to such a low level as it is now. And so that was one of the reasons I consistently showed up over the 2 years that the Café has been in existence, which you initiated. I think you, me, and TJ, one evening right after the big hurricane hit in Houston, which I think was a very big trauma for the country, certainly for Houston, that in some ways was even bigger than Katrina. So we may have to just sort of, the whole Gulf Coast may be gone pretty soon, actually. Well, you don't need too many more hurricanes before New Orleans is going to be permanently underwater. So I think, though, as Tim Morton says, it's not too late. If we just stopped, if we left 10% of the farmland fallow for a year, we could have dramatic impacts on the whole Delta region. The whole Mississippi River would reconfigure. So that's what I am not wanting to endorse, the idea that we're just deeply wounded, beautiful souls who can't deal. I think the beautiful soul syndrome is really a product of nihilism. And it's where most, like Joni Mitchell says, all romantics have the same fate, cynical and drunk and boring someone in some dark cafe. I think that's something that we could all admit to on occasion. So I'm not wanting to go that way, and especially as you see such a brilliant spokesperson as Greta, who I can't imagine her getting drunk and cynical. dark cafe. But I think that I don't want us to reduce all of our efforts as if they're not enough. So I believe I'm working for LGBT community. I've been working for it since I've been a teenager, before it was even labeled LGBTQ. And there's now several centers for gay seniors here in New York, and I'm sure in other parts of the country. And just in the nick of time, because I'm becoming a senior now. So creating the conditions for this is now something that's coming back to me in ways that I had not predicted. You don't think about this when you're 20 or 30 or 40. But now that I'm a senior, I realize what a devastatingly bleak social landscape it is. I've lost so many people. We're not going to come back. And as you probably have felt in your own life, you start to realize no one's replaceable. You can't replace anybody. And each person that dies, they take a vast library with them. As Edmund White said, each person, he called the epidemic, the metaphor he used was the burning library. Every person is the equivalent of the Alexandria library. Think of all the ancient history that was lost when that library went down. So anyway, I don't want to get maudlin or full of self-pity or indulge in the beautiful soul syndrome, because I think we should continue to work for social justice, for LGBTQ, eliminating racism and sexism. Many of us have been doing this for a very long time, and we should continue to do so, because I think there's a deep relationship between all of those struggles and climate and dealing with global warming. I don't call it climate change, I call it global warming. That to me, we have lots of skills that we've accumulated. And I think we can celebrate that and start pooling our resources and the learnings and our imaginative resources, especially ASAP. I don't want to use this metaphor, but I don't know what else to use. We need to step on it. We don't have a whole
not
lot
the bug,
of time.
not a button, not on the bug, and not on the gas either.
See, we need
the accelerator. Would you say?
Yeah, help me with this. We need new metaphors. These metaphors, rubber meets the road, and I think all these metaphors suck, and they come out of car culture, which dominates us. Let's face it. And I think it's going to take a while for us to rewire our social imaginations so that we won't continue to fall into the trap of using these outworn metaphors, which are clogging our categories.
Mm-hmm. There was a term that Devor Loeffler used in one of the Generations talks that you, TJ, Doug, I think Michael was on as well. It was the pleroma.
Barrett.
Was it Barrett?
Yeah.
Right. The pleroma, he said. And the context for that word or for that concept, which is kind of like I understood it to be the warm, attractive thing that draws you toward it. That the context of that is that in a way, what we need, again, is like a vision. Like, what are we growing into? What do we want this world to look like, this earth to look like? When I walk out, I'm not happy to see roads and cars and most of the buildings around me. I like seeing people. I like seeing birds. I like seeing insects. I like seeing the sky. I like seeing the mountains. I think part of what the idea of the pleroma was is that there can be an aesthetic reason to live. And, while it is true that we've really fucked things up, it may not be the most productive thing, may not be, or the only productive thing to beat ourselves up about it. But we do have to kind of, I don't know what we have to beat something up. And
Donald Trump.
I mean, that's the part of the argument, like that someone like, say, Chris Hedges is making, and that Greta makes as well, is that most of the damage is being done by a relatively small number of people. And we're all kind of caught in the trap. And you know, it's a path. It's a network of dependencies. Another term that came through that generations dialogue. And on a material level, there are energy dependencies, right? Oil, gas, concentrated stores of carbon, which we combust to liberate the energy, which we harness, we use to sustain these lives of relative abundance. There's a lot of things that we practically and pragmatically can do and are doing to transition from a carbon-based economy to a sunlight-based economy, which would be a really
sunlight-based economy.
Right?
I love it. Let's go for that.
We should
repeat that in every conversation 100 times.
Sunlight. I like that.
That's where same-sex marriage came from. We repeated it over and over and over again. 20 years later, it became a reality. This is where I believe language is very important. It's you take one concept that people know. You take another concept that people know, and then you bring them together, which baffles them for about a decade. And then all of a sudden, they're all talking about, what did you call it? A sunlight economy. Yeah, why not? And what was that economy before it was a sunlight economy? It was a carbon-based economy. Boy, that was stupid. Isn't it a great thing that we got over that one? So let's generate some energy around some new metaphorical constructs.
Yeah. Forestry is another thing. I've had the pleasure to work and partly make a living in my other life, my professional life, with a company called Forever Redwood, that whose premise is to restore forest land to what they call old growth again, because at one time this whole continent was covered in forests. There, 95% of those redwoods were cut down and turned into houses and railroad ties and firewood and whatever else. And forests, over a little bit of time, it's not immediate because the trees have to grow, but they can sequester tremendous amounts of carbon. They're made of carbon, and they're beautiful, and they provide habitats for animals and insects and all kinds of critters. And I've seen videos where forests can be planted with drones. They could plant 1 trillion trees if they wanted to. If we wanted to, there was the political will, the seeds, the land, etc. We could be planting trees like crazy. The thing is to let them grow. A lot of the trees, a lot of the usage of those kinds of hyper-industrial planting methods are to create tree farms, which are potentially marginally beneficial, but not too little too late. Would be too little too late if that was all that we did. So I think that there's a pragmatic spirit that can be drawn upon, but part of it is that it has to be called forth by beauty, by beautiful images, by beautiful ideas. Like, what world do we want to live in if we don't want to live in this one? It's one thing to call for justice, and I resonate with those calls, and I feel the rage and the grief. And we also need to have sweetness and something to live for. I think children are something to live for. And of course, children grow up to become adults, and some of them turn out to be rotten. And
Yeah,
so they're not.
Trump was a baby one time.
Yeah, he's probably
Very
very cute, or not. He may have looked like the demon incarnate even as a toddler. Uh, but what I when I look at my daughters and I imagine my children's children and theirs, I, there's a pleroma there because they're beautiful beings and they're alive. They're alive with spirit. They're alive with compassion. They love animals. They love bugs. They love discovery. They love adventure. And I would want to see an Earth that is a safe place for adventure, a safe place for exploration, a safe place for um, learning and growing and evolution, and also to, like Lauren Olamina wanted Octavia Butler's character in The Parable of the Sower to explore the stars. I think it's a worthy ambition to uh, to wish to visit other worlds. And however, I don't think that should come at the expense of this one. And I think part of the dilemma that we're in is that technology can be part of the solution. But technology without a vision it is in service to, that's actually worth using that technology for, I think becomes very destructive and becomes very nihilistic. So when I hear of, say, Jeff Bezos describe his ideas for what the future of humanity might be in a interplanetary kind of civilization, I have trouble really getting behind that. Um, he seems to see the Earth as he described it as it'll be a nice college town, is what he said. It'll be like a nice college town. We'll put it all back together, and then the real action will be in these pods, kind of free floating pods out in space that are perfectly encapsulated worlds unto themselves. And part of me thinks maybe he's right. Maybe that's how it'll be. And yet another part is like just in my core. My body is like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel right. Uh, and uh, and so who are we investing in? Who are we investing our time, energy, attention? Who are we? What kind of dependencies are we perpetuating, and which ones are we breaking? And which new ones do we want to create? Because we have to build that ship of death. Yeah, and I guess I want to say that part of why I want to do Cosmos and why I'm showing up myself week after week, or the weeks that I do, is because I think that there is a vision. I think we do have a vision. I think we don't all individually have the full vision, but kind of like the parts of an elephant, or like a mosaic, we have pieces of it which we could put together, shards, let's say, and when they fit together, they make sense, and I think they remind us of our wholeness and our wholeness.
Oh, I love that. Our wholeness and our holes.
And our wholeness, our holes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we're already open. And we're also, ironically, closed. So we're open and closed at the same time. And that's
Heidegger had something to say about that, his revealing and concealing,
and that
disclosing,
yep, yep, yep.
concealing. Yeah.
And called forth by beauty. We also talked about old growth. And I had a question which I'll put on hold about permaculture. I think this is a future event. I think there's someone in the clean language community has written about the relationship between the practice of clean language and permaculture. So I want to study that, and maybe that's something we could develop. I believe we have a lot of models, but I don't think we're connecting them.
It's
And
1
create
o'clock.
new models, which we're going to need a lot of. But I think that, so I'm putting that aside. You said called forth by beauty, justice, and sweetness, and children, and Pleroma, and Beatrice, and Carmen, whom I've had the good fortune to meet. And we've had some adventures together. We went to MoMA
Mm-hmm.
with your 2 daughters, and Kayla. So you got a lot of good feminine energy around you. I'm grateful for that. I think that makes you a much more balanced person than you would be otherwise.
I would be quite nihilistic without the feminine around me.
But I'm also, so having said all of that, is there anything else about sweetness and whereabouts is that sweetness? Does it have a size or a shape?
Art comes to mind.
What kind of art?
Honey art.
Honey art.
Buzzing art. Buzzing art.
Buzzing art. And buzzing art. And is there anything else about buzzing art?
The bee. The bee metaphor comes to mind. It's a
Bee. Is that a little lexical? Is that a homophone? Homophone? I'm thinking of your daughter as well as the bee.
I hadn't intended it that way, but obviously my intentions are only part of this.
That's my intrusion. I apologize. That's certainly not a clean intervention there. That's my projection. But at least I claim my projection. Yeah.
Well, I identify with the bee. I'm attracted to beauty. I'm attracted to petals, pistils, and stamens, and to the nectar. And I'm a collector of little bits of nourishment. And my practice is to transform all those little bits into that sweetness. And this is an old metaphor. I think I stole it from Abhivana Gupta. Abhivana Gupta, the Indian sage.
I know him, but I can't pronounce his name.
I've practiced a little. And a friend who is a scholar, actually, of Abhivana Gupta, and who was writing a paper on his use of that metaphor. I'm a pollinator, and I like gardens, and gardens are a human thing. Gardens are a way that humans interact with and relate to nature. um, this perhaps gets to the mythological side of things. There's a wonderful song that's been shared. I think you shared it, Joni Mitchell, Woodstock.
I love it. Yeah.
That's sweetness.
Yeah.
And I think that awakens in the breast. It awakens a longing for a kind of home. It's maybe not a literal home. It may not be the literal home of Genesis. But part of what I think is one of the possibilities of an enlightened humanity would be that we would relate to Earth, Gaia, as a whole, WHOLE, as a like a garden, as gardeners, and therefore we would want a lot of life in it. We'd want a lot of well, I think there's something to that metaphor. One of the things I really like about Kayla actually is that she's a gardener, and like a literal gardener, and I think that part of what we also can do in communities, in wider networks, and in our kin, with our kin, KIN, is is act as gardeners to our culture, to our discourse, to what we save, to what we allow to flourish, to what we maybe need to weed or to tamp down. We're overtaken. We're overtaken with invasive species. And we're living in an idiocracy. But we don't have to, strictly speaking. And so if we begin creating those conditions, like you did in the gay movement, with it's not a guarantee. You didn't. It wasn't strategic on your part. You were responding to immediate needs, and I think that that's what we're all being called to do. That's what Greta is, I think. Really powerfully conveying is that there are some immediate needs that we need to attend to. And I think the who comes back in because we have to be the who. We, the amorphous, ambiguous, liminal, we between stories and between spaces, like in that donut hole, or riding the topological wave. We have to be that response, and I don't think anyone's going to create it for us. Like if we want paradise, who's going to? I don't unless it's well, maybe in relationship with other intelligences. Maybe we can't do it alone, too. As by speaking as human. That was something Heidegger also pointed to. His letter on humanism. He saw the nihilism, or the nihilistic aspect or side of humanism. That was something I tried to insert into the framing of this, as the post and the trans, because there is the vision that, well, we're going to evolve ourselves out of this, and we're going to combine with machines in some way, and we're going to send out swarms of nanobots to suck up carbon dioxide, and we will become a new species, which transforms what the Earth is. It's not what we think it is. And there's something attractive about that too. That there's something that appeals to the masculine in me, to the boy who likes spaceships and stuff. like that, rockets and propulsion. So I love the feminine, but I also love the masculine. And I think that part of what is really broken about our society is that there isn't there often isn't very good flow or dialogue or relations between, and that is because of a long history of trauma. And so even to speak about the climate, although it may appear to be an issue having to do with carbon emissions and methane and chemistry and earth science, we still have to talk about our interiors. And so that's part of, I think, what we've tried to create space for here. And although probably in terms of participation in the cafe, there are more men than women, I think that in Cosmos, part of what I know I have intentionally tried to foster and nurture and cultivate is a space for the feminine and the masculine. And so there's not just the attractive feminine. There's also the dark feminine. This is something Bridget Burke has been writing and podcasting about. And I think that that's part of what Greta is speaking from. And it's also part of what we're feeling the heat of, in the storms and the hurricanes, the flood. In a way, one way we can read it is that this is the dark feminine, coming back. And that's exciting, and it's also scary. And I'm not doing it justice with my paltry words here.
I loved it. I was, you're talking about pistils and stamens and transforming these little bits into that sweetness. And then love, love the feminine, love the masculine, the boy and the girl. And I want to add, I love the feminine. I love the masculine. I love the queer, the hermaphrodite, the androgynous. And that's probably why I love Jesus, because I think he was queer. Very hardcore. Him and his 12 disciples. Okay. I was amused as I listened to your conversation with Michael. And you were talking about Plato and the transformations that occur in our experience as we move from the personal to the transpersonal dimensions. What you didn't mention, and I don't blame you for this, was Plato's, in the Symposium, is recording a dialogue between Socrates and Diotima, the wise woman, who talked about boy love and the attraction that a man has, sexual attraction to the boy, can become transformed into a higher level kind of love. Now, Plato did not know anything about homosexuals or straights or gays. That's something that we know about. And I think that it would be an intrusion to project onto his dialogue certain of our postmodern sensibilities, gay or straight. But I think it's fine if you're a straight person, you want to use this, that's fine. And as a gay person, I can use this too, because it's our foundational literature. It's foundational to Western civilization. So many people can use it in many different ways. But it's not all relative. Okay, I just want to make that clear. It's not up for grabs. There's some things that you can't do with these plays, with Plato. But I think that we've been struggling with these kinds of where we've been, where we're going, the different metaphorical landscapes, both personal and those that we share. And I wanted to just return. Maybe we can go another 15 minutes.
Sure.
If that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple of questions here. But you, in your dream with your brother, 9/11, after the terrorist attacks, and in the dream, you were aware that there was a cosmic, that there was a, that you expressed love for your brother, and then you did this, the cosmic mudra. This is a big stretch for me. So is there a relationship between this cosmic mudra and this?
Mm-hmm.
And something that I'm drawing upon here. This is a big research project. I think we're creating research. This is research creation. As,
Yeah, that's a good term.
Who was it who said that?
Erin Manning.
Erin Manning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm drawing upon her. But something recently, I was going to quote this in our get-together tomorrow on Blake, Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. That he says about visions, the more than human personages of visionary experience never do anything. Similarly, the blessed do anything in heaven. They are content merely to exist. Under many names and attired in an endless variety of costumes, these heroic figures of man's visionary experience have appeared in the religious art of every culture. Sometimes they are shown at rest, sometimes in historical or mythological action. But action, as we have seen, does not come naturally to the inhabitants of the mind's antipodes, opposites. Right?
Mm-hmm.
To be busy is the law of our being. The law of theirs is to do nothing. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition there, and I question it. I think that's a model of the visionary that is, I think we've outgrown that kind of dualism between doing and nothing. And that may be something to do with this and this. The entity, which I called brother, certainly stranger, I don't think this entity, which I considered much smarter than I am, I don't think he's doing nothing. Okay? So I think there's a difference between the mystical and the visionary, something that also Aldous Huxley draws upon. And I think many of us in our love for meditation and sitting in a lotus pose on our cushions and spacing out for hours have gotten really lost in the void. And I think the mystical is magical and certainly necessary, but is not sufficient. And I think the visionary is doing something different than the mystic. Although many mystics were visionaries, almost all of them who created religions were visionaries. Their followers were not necessarily. And I think this is where we need to break out and create a new axial age, rather than drawing just upon Jesus and Buddha and a handful of really smart guys meditated a lot or tapped into some cities or had some paranormal experiences, walking on water, whatever. I think that those opportunities we're all being called upon. I think to call forth this beauty. And I also, and this may be another topic for another occasion, but the idiot angel in disguise, you say. The idiot angel in disguise. Maybe. What kind of maybe is that? Which I don't expect you to answer, but if it triggers something that I'm very curious about that. Or wherever else
Did
you
I
want.
say maybe?
Yes, you did. I said
Well,
idiot angel in disguise. You were talking about the relationship between the idiot, which you don't want to be,
yeah.
the angel, and then you said the idiot angel in disguise, maybe. Fortunately, this is in the archives, so we can go back and reconstruct it.
I imagine, that what I thought is that the idiot might just be an idiot, and that one could, paint lipstick on that particular. I don't want to disparage pigs.
I love this, yeah.
But the mystical, the visionary, I want to say the pragmatic, but in service of the visionary and of the creative. Uh, I think visionary is a seeing. It's a real seeing of what is, and what is as emergent, what is as potential, what is as achronic. I don't want to use that, but aperspective. That might be the right word, or a better word. I think that there's something in the visionary that's also a prayer. And we're reading Blake. Blake was steeped in the Bible. And there's a lot that he's doing in his work, and he flows into different modes. Sometimes it's satire, sometimes it's prophecy, and sometimes I think it's prayer. And I think that in a new axial age, there's perhaps a different kind of prayer, and it's a prayer that is not purely transcendent. It's not purely about a transcendent being lending assistance or fulfilling um, a contract, or it's a prayer that is energized. I think it's a prayer that is a way of channeling and focusing energy that is drawing on the visionary, but is also pushing into the pragmatic. It's pushing into what should be. I think art has something to do with that. I think art can be. I've used it this way, and I've made it this way. It could be a form of prayer. And to whom is one praying? that I think is an interesting question, because it changes, but in a way, we're always praying to the divine. We're always praying to the one, that is also two, also many. I if this is also a kind of cosmic theater, and we have roles to play, then I also think about what our roles are, what they could be, and I've at times, let's say, identified as an activist, but not only. And I I feel drawn also to that creator of beauty, the creator of the pleroma that draws the activist into a beautiful future. And that wakens up those who are not activists to want a future, to know that there's more. There's more than this. It gets better, right? That's a phrase that just picked out of a different discourse, but I think which may also apply or could apply. So at this point, I think I'm just dropping shards of thought and image. I appreciate that we've had this conversation. I think it's different than other conversations that we've had.
Thank you. Me too. I just want to backtrack a little. Art as a form of prayer, and we also talked about. I think you touched on this. I just want to add something to it. The kind of gross reductionism that makes a quark more real than an elephant. That kind of materialism, which leads to a very profound nihilism. You come out of nothing, so you can do any fucking thing you want, right? I think also, you pointed to this, you didn't say it, I'm adding, but also I think there's an idealist version of that kind of nihilism. You can just sit on your meditation pillow and enter nirvana. Fuck it, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. And I believe we are visionaries and mystics and realists and critics. And I believe in your dialogue with Michael, you went over this, which these patterns we've discussed before. So it's coming out of our history as a group. I think it's very important that we start paying attention to that history. I don't think we do enough of that. I don't think we complete enough distinctions. And it all just goes right back into the void. So this would be, I know some of us are paying a lot of attention to this. And I think we should do our best to bring these forward and do our best right at the end of each conversation. I would love it. At the beginning, rather than spending half an hour talking about the weather, if we don't have anything decided upon, let's just, where would you like to start? Okay. For an audience member, that 20 minutes of the weather is a snooze. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to watch. I'm going to go to another channel real fast. So I'm just saying, as an audience member, being mindful of that when I'm a participant, observer, as I am now with you in this intersubjective space. How can we grab the attention of an audience if we don't know where our attention is going because we haven't got a frame? Mm-hmm. You know, I'm all for chunking down and chunking slow, but not that slow. Half an hour of the shooting the breeze. I mean, come on, guys.
I think that's a quotable. Not that slow.
And also another, I think we've all opened up all kinds of research creation possibilities here. For me, clean language and permaculture. I want to check out that article. Let me share that. I think the ship of death. So I have nihilism. Your interesting observation about that visionary episode I had. I call this a vision, by the way. This is a vision. Mm-hmm. Visionary, at any rate. This is not about me or my mission in life. This is about what, not who am I, but what the fuck is going on on these other levels, which are totally invisible to me. Mm-hmm. I'm not invisible to those other levels. And this is a communique from that field of all possibilities, just as I believe this is a communique from that field of all possibilities. And you and I may be just the lucky sucker. You know, the field of all possibilities is decided to channel this through temporarily. If we have and if we can remember it the next day, if we're not too hungover by all the partying the night before, we might get something done. And I probably want to close this thinking about permaculture, materialism, nihilism, idealist forms of nihilism. Also, you mentioned the token, and you were talking about the unique shapes that the token provides, and encryption, which I hadn't made that connection. But I do make the connection with the constant question, does it have a size or shape? Which I bore everyone shitless asking because I want to know, is there a relationship between any of these concepts and something perceptual? And I believe there is. It's just a little bit underneath this root brain chatter. And so that's my interest. I want to go underneath, not to nothing, but to what's underneath the nothing. And there's something there. And I think this is a different kind of story than the story the materialists and the idealists have been telling us. And I believe this is a new age that could be happening. You can call it by whatever name you wish, but I think it's happening, and I think we know it's happening. And I think the more opportunities we have to create these forums where research creation can start to get activated, then we integrate these functions of the dreamer, the realist, the critic. Left to their own resources, they're extremely limited. The critic can do almost nothing without the visionary or the realist. And the visionary is quite incompetent without the realist. The visionary does not need the critic. And I think that's what the realist does, is create negotiations, keeping them separate. There's the visionary over there, there's the critic over there. So, Mr. Critic, what do you think about this? The critic will tell you all kinds of things. Then the realist goes to the dreamer and says, could you have a dream about this? And the dreamer will say, well, yeah, sure. Crank out thousands of dreams. And then you take that back to take that back to the critic, and the critic can then evaluate further. But then you have a system that is not broken. And I think we're in a deeply broken system. I think those functions have been co-opted by perhaps a few. And we are all living in the undertow of the arrested development of, I believe, these very smart people. They're not stupid. And, you know, I believe we're doing the best that we can with what we've got. And so I hope that we can do something on the symposium. We can do something on permaculture. Do something on the materialism versus idealism. You may want to do a seminar on Heidegger. I would love to attend that. I could think of a lot of questions I could ask it. And Nagarjuna, the whole, the part, the whole, the HOLE, the empty. This comes out of Nagarjuna. So there are different kinds of logics.
Tetralemma.
Tetralemma. There are paraconsistent logics that, as the law of the excluded middle starts to break down, which I think is doing everywhere. We're going to need we can't eliminate logic, but we need to create different kinds of logic. And this is going to be very, very hard for us to do. Let's face it. But I think we would not do it unless we had to. And I believe we have to. And I don't think we have a whole lot of wiggle room here. But those who are interested in this, they may not be a whole lot of people who are. But I think if we create conditions where we can focus our attention so that we have a meta attention, a shared attention, I believe we have immense resources that could come through us. And then that would require a different attitude. And I think that's the challenge: is can we give our attention to our attitude in this moment? Am I doing am I seeking status? Do I want approval? Do I want to dominate? Or do I want to submit all those male masculine tendencies in the pathological forms? They become incredibly competitive for status. Or do we want to bond? Do we want to fuse with others? Enter into a deep codependency? I think these are all the kinds of tensions that the masculine and the feminine can get reactivated in us. They're very pathological forms of this. And I think this is something that Bonnie was pointing out in her conversation. And she said, men like to rank. It's just, we were all brought up to do that. And I don't think we're going to stop doing that anytime soon. But let's just be aware that we're doing it when it's happening, so that then the nastier side of it doesn't come forward and dominate us. So, and also we like to link as well. Male bonding, it runs very deep. And I also appreciated that you said some women don't want to do this. So we guys shouldn't feel that bad that we're getting together and working on this stuff. I mean, I come from homo society. Lots of men got together and worked on shit. And most of us were gay. And we had a lot more resources together than we had separately. And there were lots of women who got together. A lot of lesbians were talking among themselves, and they were bonding. And they were doing all kinds of things that we weren't privy to, the gay men. But there was a crisis. AIDS epidemic hit. And so these two, I think, healthy versions of the feminine and the masculine came together. And I believe we created something very different. And I believe the whole culture reaps the benefits from these differences. So that's my interest in William Connolly, which you brought up when we had a conference on him, and his use of the gay movement as what we should learn from that movement. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the gay movement was very strong at, many gay people were Jewish, were Christian, were Muslim, were Black, were Asian, were Caucasian. So we had hybrids. And it wasn't all pretty, believe me. It was a real big mess. And it still is messy. But I believe that I think Connolly, why he brought this up, was he said that the kind of coalitions that were created, we need to do that now. We need to do more of it. We need to do it better. And I believe that that's why I've made this plea. Let's learn how to triangulate from the margins rather than get trapped in these pseudo polarities where there's a nihilist there who wants to sound off on how useless all of this is. And we spend an hour and a half with this cranky bitchiness, this bitchiness. And I have no patience for it. I don't think it's inevitable. I think we can bring gentle attention to these tendencies in ourselves and in each other. But I'm a little frustrated because I feel like the conversation that you and I are having right now, which I think is very soulful, working affectively and cognitively, should have happened 6 months ago. I think we're way behind. I'm talking about you and me. Okay. And anyone else who's watching this, Caroline, Doug, Ed, the regulars, TJ, brilliant people here have come here and shared with us. Jeffrey, too many to mention. You know who they are. I know who they are. So we're up against it. And I'm extremely buoyed up by this conversation. I think it's been a very stimulating one, and I've learned a lot. I guess what I've learned, if I were to create some sort of summary, what I've learned from this experience is that we have a lot of skill, that we're very skillful, and when we're congruent in alignment, we're also very powerful. So I think you've explored this too, how we can become. I think in one conversation, I can't remember which, where you had a belief about power. It's not just about dominating others. We're seeking some sort of rank and file kind of arrangement. But anyway, let's pay attention to all of our dreams and use them well. And not all of our dreams are going to be useful. I'm not saying let's not fall into a sort of enter the dark side of the dreamer, because the dark side of the dreamer is quite dark. So we do need to monitor this in ourselves and recognize our blind spots, which I have plenty of, and so do you, and so do we all. And we need each other to sort of bring attention gently, very gently, to each other's blind spots. And our preferences and our different styles of communication are going to add to our diversity, rather than subtract from our diversity, so that we don't just become another totalizing schizoid family structure. Yeah. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm really curious about it. If you've learned something from this dialogue today, I'd love to hear it, or you'd like to summarize it anyway, because I know we're getting ready to wrap up.
Well, I've learned that we could have a dialogue, and I'm glad that we have. And I think the other piece that I would just touch on is relating to perception and perceptual realities compared to abstract or nihilistic, mystical realities, even. Blake, we're reading Blake, and we're talking about William Blake tomorrow. And I've been reading Northrop Frye's study of Blake, which is one of the first that really brought his work into full relief, I think, for readers. And the point that he makes there, by way of introduction, is that one of Blake's main axes to grind was with the materialists of his time, John Locke, Francis Bacon, and
Newton.
And Newton. Oh, yeah, and Newton too.
Big time.
And it's interesting because the introduction is as much kind of an exercise in cognitive philosophy as it is in literary interpretation. Blake had a different ontology than those guys. And what I've realized is I share that ontology. I share Blake's ontology, not Newton's. What I think part of what's happening is like we're having an ontological shift,
right,
at large. That's really what
epistemological as well.
Yeah,
it's a double whammy.
And it's very uncomfortable because our whole world is predicated upon a materialist ontology, and not just our whole world, but our livelihoods. My livelihood, our social worlds, our professional worlds, our worlds of identity and personal meaning and value and relationship structure. It's all predicated, and we don't see how deeply predicated it is or how entangled we are with ideas. But they're not just ideas; they're ways of being. Like they quickly. We'll have to have we'll have to continue this conversation, and we will. But part of what I know that I'm working through as a poet is the schizophrenic moment that I'm in, that we're in, and that going from an individualist, atomistic, reductive view of the world to one that is ecological, broadly speaking, not just on the material plane, but vertically and horizontally. That's a momentous, I think, transition. And perhaps each person needs to make that in their own way. But part of what I think you're saying and offering is that doing that together could be a lot more, it's actually required now. Like because it's required not epistemologically as much as pragmatically, as much as because of the climate issue. We're gonna, the nihilist in me would say, like, we're going to die anyway. So what does it matter? It's one, and
So why not just work on Wall Street and make all the big bucks you can? Nothing to stop you. I
yeah,
think that.
or why not create really conceptual, poetry, and make your mark on the void through some very transient form of internet fame or something like that. Like there's it doesn't just have to condense down into like these caricatures of bad people or of careless people. I think those are active. Those tendencies are active in ourselves, and I'm hyper aware of them in myself to the point that they paralyze me sometimes. And I'm not. I don't always trust my expressions because I'm not sure if they're coming from that higher self or that future self, uh, or from the inner um, the inner agent of the inner colonist, the inner um, lie. When poetry feels true, and Blake's poetry feels true to me, um, it brings so much joy in life, and that's also what I responded to in Greta's statements. They weren't poetic at all, but they were, because they were true at that affective and that like visionary level, and visionary as just seeing what is, not as necessary, not like a special altered state, seeing what is. So I look forward to continuing tomorrow and future cafes and other occasions, and hope others will join us for the
Yeah,
adventure.
I'm also thinking of Michael and trauma and body work. This is a potential future episode. I don't know if the cafe or something outside the cafe. And I know Caroline and you have been working diligently, and I know Caroline is into permaculture as well.
That's right.
And I'm definitely a student of that. So I would hope that you and Caroline might join forces with myself as well. I would love to bring in clean language and maybe craft some meta questions that might be of use and delight to all of us. I think Heather and Jeffrey and yourself, I thought that was a wonderful way of working together collaboratively on quantum poetics. I believe that we should follow up on that, revisit that. I think deep bows to Kayla for all that she's been doing for us. I don't think she's gotten enough credit for her contributions, and there's so many others. I don't want to. I apologize if I've left out a lot of people, but I'm just wanting to create the conditions that we could bring forward lots of different projects, collaborative, and I think we've started this, and we have a long way to go, and we certainly, I think those who of us who are motivated should continue to to enliven one another with our metaphors and our stories, and our affective zones, and those mysterious areas that we don't have any words for, I think are extremely fertile. So I hope we continue as a poet. You know this well. The poetry comes from our future. For the stuff that we don't know how to talk about, that's where poets are usually giving a lot of attention. So I'm looking forward to continuing this dialogue tomorrow. We'll be working with Blake directly. So anyway, I hope we'll pay attention, and so that we don't have these limbos where to be decided someday. I think that really frustrates me. There's so much shit going down. Surely we can put our heads together frame a discussion once a week for 2 hours. If we can't, we're in real deep shit. I mean, and I'm all for social hour. You know, I could go down to the happy hour and have a couple of beers and shoot the breeze with millions of people. You know, and surely some of them are going to be interesting. But right now, at this stage in my life, I really need to direct my attention. Unfortunately, there is a gay senior center real nearby with all kinds of programs, and one on a program that I want to develop and share with my seniors in clean language. Working with seniors, working with grief. I've already been working with seniors for a dozen years.
With Beatrice.
And others. She wasn't my only person I worked with. But I had a dream about her last night too. A wonderful dream. But I think that's more personal. Anyway, thanks so much for this wonderful time together. If there's anything else you want to share, I'd love to hear it, or otherwise we could wrap it up and give each other a blessing for a lovely day.
Let's do that. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
You too. And all those others out there.
All right.
Y'all have a lovely day.
Bye-bye.